All right, welcome back. Brett here with ClickMel. So in this video, we're talking about sufficient data. When you make decisions, you want enough data to verify for you that the decision you're making is a good decision. So for example, let's just take a example here. If I were to have one experience with, let's say, passenger airplanes, and that one experience, the airplane went down and I barely survived, but it got hit by birds and then it goes down and we're on a deserted island. And so this is what we call anecdotal data. Well, it's one flight. But what do? I spend the rest of my life terrified of birds and planes and islands because, oh, those planes are so dangerous. Well, as you know, and I know, planes are safer than cars. They're the safest way to travel. So that data set is not sufficiently large to give me an accurate view of reality. And so then what do? I spend my entire life avoiding airplanes and never traveling anywhere because, oh, it's so dangerous, except it's wrong because the data set was not big enough to show me what the truth actually is, or the statistical truth is, again, because it's not all or nothing, black or white. There's some middle ground. But statistically, planes are super, super safe. So if instead I went on, say, I'm a business person and I'm flying all around the world all the time and I'm on 10,000 plane rides all over the place, and then one plane goes down, I'm probably going to be like, wow, that was so unlikely. Why? Because the data set in my mind is now, I still may be traumatized, but the data set is so large, I can have a little bit more of an objective perspective on what the risk is. And that's what data is telling you. It's telling you what's successful, what's really risky, the risks you don't want to take, and how to make the decisions moving from the assumption that that data is an accurate prediction of reality. So you want a data set large enough to know that it is going to be predicting future outcomes with relative certainty. Now, an example of this is maybe within Google Ads. A lot of people will go into Google Ads and they'll start turning things off. They'll, like, say we have three ads, and they're all advertising, let's say a client services. They'll just start turning other ads off, say after 20 clicks and one conversion. One person signs up through that ad and they just go start turning everything else off. Well, 20 clicks and one conversion is essentially random chance. We have no idea if that will continue. And we know this because, for example, let's just say in that business, the baseline conversion rate is going to be 2% or 3%. That's going to be acceptable. That's fairly good. Well, if 3% is good and you had 20 clicks and one conversion, well, that's like, way higher than 3%. That's a huge, okay. Well, the reason why it's so high is because the numbers are so low. You're seeing not one plane crash in 10,000 flights. You're seeing one plane crash in 20 flights, and that's still going to give you a skewed version of reality, though it's, closer, obviously, than to the truth. So what happens is as the data set increases in size, the accuracy averages out to a more fair view of reality. So we want to gather a sufficient amount of data to make the good choices. Okay, now I want to speak to how do I say this? I want to speak to how this affects businesses as they move through the life cycle and as they continue through sort of longer periods of being in business or in ministry. When you begin, you're essentially guessing. You're just saying, I have a really great idea. I'm feeling really passionate. People are going to love this. And then they do a thing and it either works or it doesn't. And that's kind of how you, to some degree, start a business. Now, of course, we want to get data on the market and if there's, want for that product. But to some degree, you're working on limited data because you don't have any data coming in from what you've already built because you haven't built it. So when you begin making decisions for a new ministry or business, you don't have any data. So everybody else has the advantage because it helps to drive the decisions that you make. But the longer you're in business, the longer you're running a ministry, the more data you have because you're collecting more and more data if you're collecting it. And you're going to have larger amounts of data. So you have sufficient data to make larger and larger decisions. And so what happens is if you're using the data properly, the more you get, the better the decisions you make. And not only that, the more you get as you make better decisions, you're operating more effectively because you're making good decisions. Then you get even better data. And then you can make even better decisions. So there's sort of this exponential growth curve with sufficient data that you start out with none. And the more you get, the more you get. And the better the decisions you can make, the better the decisions you can make. So it's very important to understand that data quality and the rate at which you increase your data gathering goes up exponentially, which helps you to really establish a presence in any given market. Now, kind of coming back around and wrapping up this video, we want to make sure we have whatever is sufficient. We want to have the sufficient amount of data before we make a decision. And when we talk about decisions, decisions means to cut off from. So when you make a decision, you're saying, okay, we've got this data over here and this data over here, and this data is not good. So scissio, right? It comes from the Latin, I believe, for scissors. It literally means to cut off from. So when you make a decision based on the data, you're cutting off this, and then you're focusing in on this. And that's a great thing if what you're focusing in on is really good. So again, we want to make sure that whatever the data set is we're making decisions on is an accurate reflection of reality. So it needs to be big enough. And let's say in a Google Ads account, it's like minimum triple digits clicks and some conversions. So we can start to see how things are averaging out over a larger, but that's small end. When we're getting into larger accounts, we need larger data for larger decisions. So we want sufficient data. In the next video, we're going to go through some examples of data cleaning and preparation, and we'll see you there.